Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent.
Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa.
We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south.
Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Syria's interim president al-Shara vows to protect Druze citizens as the military withdraws from the Sueda province, follows Israeli strikes and threats to destroy forces accused of attacking the religious minority. Russia hands over the bodies of 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers under an agreement reached during peace talks last month. In return, Ukraine repatriates the remains of 19 Russian soldiers. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has embarked on his first trip to London, signing a wide-ranging friendship treaty with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. France formally hands over its last 2 military bases in Senegal, leaving the French army with no permanent camps in West and Central Africa. And 3 people have been killed and over 1,000 evacuated in South Korea after torrential rains triggered landslides. More downpours are expected in the coming days, prompting alerts in the affected regions. Hello and welcome. We are starting with the latest from South Africa. The country's ties with the US continue to deteriorate. In the latest development, the Trump administration has denied a diplomatic visa to President Cyril Ramaphosa's special envoy to the US. The Trump administration allegedly refused to recognize Mcebisi Jonas as South Africa's official interlocutor. The visa was denied in May this year. But the revelation was recently made by the Democratic Alliance Party, or the DA. It is the second biggest party in Ramaphosa's coalition government after his African National Congress, or the ANC. After the DA's claim, the president's office accused the party of spreading disinformation. The government said that the DA is sensationalizing the matter. It added that special envoys do not present diplomatic credentials to host countries. According to reports, the denial of a diplomatic visa is not a surprising move. The Trump administration had reportedly sought the appointment of an alternative envoy, and despite repeated communications, Jonas remained the president's special envoy to the US. Jonas was appointed to improve relations with the US, but he has called the Trump a racist and a narcissist right-winger in the past. Shortly after his appointment in April, his controversial remarks against President Trump resurfaced. Now, this raised serious questions about his suitability for the role. Experts believe that rejection of a diplomatic visa is also in line with the Trump administration's strategy to give South Africa the cold shoulder, since this is not a standalone incident. It is a part of a series of steps taken by the US to isolate South Africa. In the most recent development, the US boycotted the G20 summit, currently chaired by Ramaphosa. The US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent skipped the G20 finance ministers meeting. Instead, he sent a lower-ranking official. Bessent skipped a similar meeting in February as well. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio dodged a meeting of G20 foreign ministers adding that he could not coddle anti-Americanism. The cold shoulder strategy is not restricted to not sending American officials. It was also visible during Africa Summit in Washington. The Trump administration invited leaders from smaller nations like Liberia, Senegal, Gabon, Mauritania, and Guinea-Bissau. But the leader of Africa's largest economy was snubbed at the summit. In May, Ramaphosa hoped to rekindle ties with the US with his Washington visit. Trump had invited him to the Oval Office, but he ambushed him with accusations of white genocide. Trump also showed Ramaphosa a video to back his claims, which later turned out to be false. He alleged that there were mass burial sites of whites in South Africa. The video, however, had doctored images from different African countries, including the DRC. Now, President Donald Trump was also miffed with Ramaphosa for bringing a genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, and the country's renewed ties with Iran anguished him further. Trump's ire is not restricted to diplomatic blockades. There are economic consequences too. Trump threatened to impose 30% tariffs on South African goods from the 1st of August. Now, South Africa's central bank warned that if the US tariffs come into effect, it could lead to around 100,000 job losses. The figures are extremely worrying for a nation with an unemployment rate of close to 33%. This is also a cause of concern as the US is South Africa's second biggest trading partner after China. Ramaphosa has pinned his hopes on his special envoy Jonas to mend ties with the US. But with his contentious views on the US president and absence of a South African ambassador in the US, the path to better ties seems difficult. Now, for more on this, I'm being joined by Patrick Bond, who is a political economist from Johannesburg. Thank you for being with us, Patrick.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Alison.
Now, what are the key factors driving the recent strain in diplomatic relations between the US and South Africa, particularly the rejection of President Ramaphosa's special envoy by the US government?
Well, your intro said really all of them, except one, which is that the BRICS met just a week and a half ago, and Donald Trump took that opportunity to sort of steal the limelight by saying, if you dare do anything anti-American, well, we hit you with 10% extra tariffs. And his particular concern was the potential for alternative financial routing systems. And ironically, that's actually something under discussion today, there where you are in Durban, where the G20 finance ministers and central bank leadership, including there is a higher level from the U.S., Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed. But as you pointed out, Scott Bessent isn't there, even though the U.S. is meant to take over the G20. And the particular question of Mcebisi Jonas, who is set to be the special envoy to go and calm nerves. He's a very talented former deputy finance minister who's also head of MTN, that's Africa's largest cell phone network. But in addition to his 2020 allegations that Donald Trump is racist and homophobic and a narcissist, all of the things you've mentioned, which were done in a sort of independent activist spirit. But what then he did was in running MTN, got into trouble. In fact, the trouble dates to his predecessor, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the chair in the early 2000s. And that was the Turkcell, that is Turkey's main private company, contest over Iran's contract. And because it's Iran, of course, a lot of questions, and there is some evidence that the South Africans may have bribed Iran. And one top diplomat, the ambassador from South Africa to Iran, was fired. Secondly, that MTN is in the courts in the US also for supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan by turning on and off the MTN network there at a time when US soldiers were being killed. And so there are families of those soldiers suing MTN. You can see what a mess it is that, unfortunately, Mcebisi Jonas may not have been the right person. And then you might say, well, would it have been better to have a white South African? And probably from Donald Trump, and especially Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. The answer to that is yes.
Right. And how significant is the U.S. decision to skip the high-level events such as the G20 summit in South Africa and the Africa summit in Washington? And what message does this send to Pretoria and the broader continent?
I think last week's meeting of the 5 West African coastal nations partly had the geopolitics. There was obviously minerals, so it wasn't necessarily attempting to be an Africa-wide event like Joe Biden had hosted, Barack Obama had hosted. Instead, I think what we're looking at in the, let's say, G20 positioning is that Trump doesn't really care much about the rest of the world and what they think. And the opportunity to take over the G20 and keep some of the programs and the momentum, such as debt relief for Africa or climate finance or taxing the rich, the kind of programs that Lula Ignacio da Silva, the Brazilian president, have passed to Cyril Ramaphosa this year. And indeed that you could even trace to Delhi, where Narendra Modi had started, for example, allowing the African Union to be a member and reforming the G20. That's all gone. And I don't think, they're describing what's happening now as a G20 -1 on all of these crucial issues. And it means that the finance ministers meeting in Durban, the headline today is really just that they're trying to lubricate international finance. That's the opposite of de-dollarization, of course, rather than setting up an alternative system against the dollar. I think there's a general spirit of fear among these top financiers that maybe Donald Trump will do something really crazy, as he's been doing with the world economy on trade.
Right. And how will this growing rift between the two countries impact economic cooperation, trade agreements, or South Africa's standing in global alliances like BRICS and with AGOA?
So not only did the 10% extra tariff for being a member of BRICS hit South Africa last week, also a 30% general tariff. And that's on top of the existing 50% on steel and aluminium, and there's a 25% on cars. So we're looking at a real decline, 87% decline in auto sales over the past 3 months from South Africa to the US is just one example of the destruction. So the AGOA, Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, 0% access. That's history. It was going to expire in September anyhow. And so Trump is using this leverage, and he's doing really, really brutal tariffs on everyone. I think the destruction of world trade and global value chains and the chaos and the price inflation that's going to be transmitted to US consumers will make these months of trade negotiations look ultimately like the ultimate act of self-harm. So what we call a Smoot-Hawley tradition, that is the US going protectionist, and that in the 1930s is what catalyzed the Great Depression. And I think that's, make America great. Depression, again, maybe the what we really remember Trump for. As for the trade deals that were proposed, you'll recall in May 21, in addition to offering a game of golf with Ernie Els and Retief Goosen and Gary Player in the background, the sort of white South African golfing stars who's very friendly with Trump. Nothing really has stuck, including offers to buy oil and gas. So it looks like a dud. And my own view is that there's really no space for the U.S. in the G20. They should, have a vote him off the island and maybe give next year's G19 meeting to Mexico instead.
Right. Patrick, as always, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Shifting focus now, in a major crackdown on terrorism, Ethiopia has arrested 82 suspected Islamic State members, marking the country's first large-scale operation against the ISIS network. The development highlights the terror group's growing footprint across the Horn of Africa. Ethiopian authorities confirm that 82 ISIS suspects were detained from multiple regions, including the capital Addis Ababa. They were reportedly recruited for a terror mission and had been trained in neighboring Somalia's Puntland region. Now, Puntland is a semi-autonomous region in northeastern Somalia and serves as the primary base of ISIS Somalia, the terror group's East African affiliate. While ISIS has a presence in Somalia, it is much smaller than the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab, which controls vast areas of southern and central Somalia. The group has waged a decades-long insurgency, killing tens of thousands. ISIS Somalia emerged in 2015, formed by defectors from Al-Shabaab. It operates primarily in the Puntland's Golis Mountains, focusing on targeted assassinations, extortion, and guerrilla tactics. The Puntland security forces launched a major offensive in December, capturing key territory from the group. However, despite losses, ISIS Somalia has become an increasingly integral node in the group's global network, and the arrests in Ethiopia prove that ISIS's reach extends beyond Somalia. Ethiopian officials say several of the detainees had direct links to ISIS's global media and financial networks. They were involved in logistics, funding, propaganda spreading, and setting up operational cells to carry out attacks. The group's expansion has caught global attention. The United States has conducted strikes on ISIS targets in Somalia for years, and these have intensified under Donald Trump's second term. In fact, the first strike Trump ordered in February after taking office was against ISIS in Somalia. Since then, US airstrikes have increased dramatically. Just 2 days ago, the US carried out fresh strikes in Puntland. US officials say this surge targeting ISIS Somalia is fueled by growing fears that the group is becoming a hub for regional and international ISIS affiliates. All of this comes amid a resurgence of Al-Shabaab in Somalia. In recent months, the group has captured towns and escalated cross-border attacks. Just yesterday, an Al-Shabaab bombing killed 3 Kenyan soldiers patrolling near the Somali border. Ethiopia remains a crucial part of the African Union stabilization mission in Somalia, engaged directly in combating Al-Shabaab. But the mission struggles with funding shortages, even as the security crisis in the region intensifies. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's diplomatic relations with Somalia remain tense after its port deal with the breakaway Somaliland last year. Now, the move angered Somalia's federal government, fueling fears of regional destabilization. Despite a Turkey-mediated agreement toward normalization, diplomatic frictions still linger. And amid escalating geopolitical rivalries, the terror expansion continues to destabilize the Horn of Africa. Will regional players set aside differences to confront this growing threat together? And shifting focus to the war in Sudan, where the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, is intensifying its offensive against the army, with a key battle now unfolding in Al Fasher, the last major army stronghold in the Darfur region. The Sudanese army claims it has repelled a major RSF attack on Al Fasher and says its forces inflicted heavy losses on the paramilitary group. Reports say at least 8 civilians were killed in RSF shelling during the attack. The RSF has not issued any statement on the attack. Al Fasher is the capital of North Darfur. It is the last major city in the region still under Sudanese army control. It also serves as a vital humanitarian operations hub, but the city has been under repeated siege for over a year, with supply routes cut and conditions deteriorating. As humanitarian access shrinks, the International Criminal Court warns that the situation in Darfur region is intolerable.
We come together at a time when it can seem difficult to find appropriate words to describe the depth of suffering in Darfur. The humanitarian position has reached an intolerable state. Hospitals, humanitarian convoys, and other civilian objects are apparently being targeted. Famine is escalating, and humanitarian aid is not reaching those in dire need of it.
The Sudanese civil war broke out in April of 2023, triggered by a power struggle between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary RSF. According to the United Nations, the conflict has killed over 20,000 people and displaced 14 million, though some estimates put the death toll nearer 130,000. The RSF has been fighting for control in Darfur, one of the main front lines of the conflict. While the army has maintained control over central and eastern Sudan, the RSF has focused on expanding through western regions. The RSF had initially seized large parts of Khartoum shortly after the war broke out, but the army recaptured key parts of the capital earlier this year. After those setbacks, the RSF shifted strategy westward, intensifying operations in Darfur and North Kordofan. Sudanese activists report that the RSF killed nearly 300 civilians in North Kordofan over the past weekend. The victims include women and children, with thousands forced to flee. Villages have been torched and widespread atrocities reported. North Kordofan is strategically important for the RSF, acting as a key fuel smuggling corridor into Libya. The RSF has been trying to encircle the state capital of Al Obeid, the last main road link between Khartoum and Darfur. The United States, human rights groups and the International Criminal Court have accused the RSF of war, crimes against humanity and genocide in Darfur. The RSF leadership claims it will prosecute individuals responsible for such crimes, but has offered little evidence of action. Now, the Sudanese army, meanwhile, has accused countries like the UAE of supplying the RSF with weapons and logistics, an allegation that Abu Dhabi strongly denies. Sudan's civil war has now triggered the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with over half of the population facing hunger and diseases like cholera spreading rapidly. A global drop in aid funding has further strained the humanitarian response. As the conflict intensifies, the prospect of stability in the country grows ever more distant. And our last story today is from the South African nation of Angola, where Prince Harry recreated his mother, Princess Diana's iconic landmine walk. The Duke of Sussex walked through a demined shrubland wearing protective gear. This evoked Princess Diana's memory, who walked through a cleared minefield wearing similar gear in 1997. Our next report gets you all the details.
Prince Harry is recreating his mother's legacy. Following Princess Diana's footsteps, the Duke of Sussex visited the southern African nation of Angola. He recreated her iconic landmine walk. Dressed in a protective visor and bulletproof vest, the prince walked through a demined shrubland. He also participated in a bomb detonation exercise. Undergone evoked memories of his mother's 1997 visit. She also walked through a cleared minefield in Angola, near the southern city of Huambo. Her visit was during a period when Angola was still emerging from a civil war, which spanned nearly 3 decades. Princess Diana was famously photographed meeting some of the landmine victims. She advocated for an international ban on landmines. But her picture of walking in the field became symbolic. She became the face of efforts to stop civilian harm from landmines. The iconic trip came just months before she died in a car crash in Paris. Prince Harry was just 12 years old at the time. Now, at 40, Prince Harry is carrying that cause forward. He raised concerns over the threat of landmines to civilians and backed landmine clearance efforts. The Duke of Sussex also visited a remote village. There he delivered life-saving messages to children. He said that children should never have to live in fear. He also spoke about the threat posed by the remnants of war that still endanger lives in Angola. He backed the work of Halo Trust for landmine clearance efforts, the same British charity that got Princess Diana's support during her high-profile visit.
You can see, they've been working away here, and they've excavated out, and they've uncovered a mine.
He raised demining efforts with the Angolan president as well. Prince Harry also met Angolan President João Lourenço and discussed ways to accelerate deeming operations in the country. This is not the first time Prince Harry has visited Angola. He retraced his mother's steps in Huambo in September 2019 as well. Angola hosts Africa's largest landmine fields. It is a curse that the country received from the 27-year-long civil war, which followed its independence from Portugal in 1975. It mainly stemmed from the power struggle between different liberation movements. The landmines laid since then have killed or wounded thousands. According to the Halo Trust, at least 88,000 people have been killed or wounded by landmines in Angola. Most of the casualties occurred in 2002 and 2003. This is when Angolans were returning to their homes after peace was declared. Despite removing over 100,000 bombs from an area, the size of 7,000 football fields, the risk remains alarmingly high. Even as NGOs make efforts to demine Angolan fields, the danger prevails. It continues to threaten innocent lives. Prince Harry's visit spotlights the struggle of Angolans globally.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.